So just to introduce Hayden, he's director and founder of Morgan Green Advisory, a sustainable finance consultancy, previously a director at the UK Green Investment Bank and Group and convener of ISO 32210 Sustainable Finance. So over to you, Hayden.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the invitation to talk today. It's great to have the opportunity. And before I get started into the main slide pack, I just wanted to thank the contributors to Working Group 1 of ISO 32210 for their amazing work, high commitment, engagement and passion, often staying up past midnight, getting up before 6 in the morning to contribute to the sustainable finance standard. So I just want to extend my thanks there. It's been a real privilege leading the group. So I'm going to introduce the actual standard. It's currently out for ballot, actually, and we can come on to that at the end. So there is still opportunity to get involved. And I would absolutely encourage, if you are interested, then to go out through your national membership body we can see how we can do that towards the end of the session. So I just wanted to introduce the standard itself, go through some of the aims and goals of the standard, the actual principles and guidance which form the core part of the actual standard itself, to whom the standard is intended to be used by or interested parties. As I say, the invitation to participate, and then we'll pass on the Q&A for now. By all means, use the function, but I think we'll pick up on that just in the interest of time at the end of the webinar today. So next slide, please. So Peter's already mentioned this slide. I think it's a really good representation of the ecosystem of all the different participants, stakeholders and players in the finance sector. And I'm not going to dwell on this, only to point out the role of standards, and in particular the Sustainable Finance Standard, is to bring a lot of these different aspects together to close the gaps between the boundaries that you can see there, facilitate the alignment of interest, and to make this flow of finance as frictionless as possible to sustainable outcomes. And it involves all these different regulators, infrastructure parties, stakeholders, all the different sort of supply and demand bit in the middle, but crucially the products as well. And the standard itself is centered around activities and products, as well as operational performance. And this is a really interesting sort of feature of the standard. It encourages that sustainable outcomes as a core element of the standard. The next slide, if we could just move to that, goes through this. These are some of the aims now. So we've got high level aims around what we're trying to do in terms of development of the standard. It's to really support the transition. So it's aimed at all financial organizations. We'll cover some of the specific types, but it's not only those sort of reaching sort of green or sustainable activities right now. It's to help support financial organizations transition towards long-term sustainability goals. It's also aiming to drive value. So how do you realize the opportunity created as part of the global transition towards a low carbon, more sustainable economy? It looks to be sustainable and profitable. So how do you balance the needs for sustainable outcomes and the transition with remaining profitable and fulfilling your shareholders and investors requirements? It obviously looks at risk and how you identify and mitigate the risk, and also to align interests with various other sort of stakeholders. So stakeholder engagement, again, is a key aspect of this, and it interfaces with a lot of different internal stakeholders, but also external stakeholders as well. And we can come on to how the standard can actually be really beneficial in getting that stakeholder interest, in getting that stakeholder buy-in. The next slide also just talks a little bit about some of the themes we've already heard around cohesion, to providing that consolidated guidance and harmonization. It also includes good practice in terms of how you implement some of the principles. It enables greater transparency, so you can clearly demonstrate that alignment of interest. You can demonstrate enhanced performance towards your sustainability goals. And a sort of novel feature of the standard, in order for it to become and remain relevant, we've heard about all the different explosion of initiatives globally from previous speakers. I won't dwell on that, but this standard is now designed with a complementary resource which will be held and curated on the ISO website, so that it is relevant, because we want to maintain the shelf life of the framework standard itself, but also make use of all the existing good practice and emerging practice as we're right in the middle of this sort of revolution. In terms of the scope, the next slide there just talks around some of the key aspects of the scope. It's really around integration of sustainability principles. Materiality is another key aspect. There's concepts of double materiality, dynamic materiality, and the sort of adage of what not everything that is relevant can be reported and measured, and not everything that is measured can be reported. So it's that sort of materiality aspect of it as well. It's to get this alignment of interest throughout all the organisation. So all the different activities, all the different functions of a financial organisation, and it's also, like I say, across the sector. It may be more applicable to potentially emerging market participants. It's not to say we're excluding the sort of slightly more developed markets, but it's there, as we've talked about, as a sort of soft regulatory sort of framework that financial organisations can apply in the absence of local regulation. So moving on to the main aspects of the actual standard itself, the next slide there shows the contents. I won't go through the actual contents in detail, other than to highlight the sustainable finance principles, which we will discuss in the next section, but also the implementation guidance. So there's two key aspects of the standard, like I say, these principles, and then how to implement the principles at the organizational level. So if we just move on and focus now on the principles, we've got this nice diagram which shows you the interaction between all the different key principles there, and each one of these principles is a key sort of chapter or section within the standard itself. The nice part about this diagram, and again, this diagram is actually from the standard itself, it shows how there is increased and enhanced sustainability outcomes, and there's continual improvement. ISO standards, other folk will be familiar with the concept of continual improvement, which is embedded in other standards. We've taken that, we've included it here because we think it's really useful to have that increased and enhanced performance moving towards more sustainable outcomes. So looking at each of these principles now in detail, you'll see the next slide will show at the high level. Again, I won't go into the detail here. I understand that the slides will be available for afterwards, so hopefully you can absolutely see that. I will just go through at the high level. So the key sections are governance and culture, and this comes first because we think this is really important to get the board and accountability at that top level. There needs to be that ownership at the top level. That feeds into then the organizational strategy, setting goals, ambitious goals and ambitious objectives which are aligned with global goals. So the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, which are applicable to that organization. Having a handle on not only the risk, but the opportunity presented by the transition as well. And how you measure impact, whether that's mitigation of negative impact or enhancing positive impact. Absolutely key part of the standard itself. I mentioned stakeholder engagement. Again, there's some really good guidance here, or there's a principle of stakeholder engagement, why it's important, and also feeding back to your stakeholders as well. So once you've engaged with them, keeping that continuous engagement. There's some really good guidance in there about how to identify your relevant stakeholders. We've talked a lot earlier today about monitoring and measurement, absolutely key. So the transparent and robust identification of your key performance indicators, which are material to your operations, your products and services, are absolutely important to measure that as well. Disclosure is a common theme, but transparency. So how you can report, how you can be transparent with your stakeholders, and that you publicly declare the organization's alignment with each of these principles, and potentially get third-party assurance as well. It's not a requirement for this standard because this standard is a framework standard, not certification standard, but it's strongly recommended, and there's guidance in there as to good practice there. And like I say, this concept of continual improvement and enhancing ambition over time towards your goals. So the next slide talks around some of the key outputs. So this is around the guidance now. These are the key features of the documentation to demonstrate alignment with the standard. And again, I won't go through them all, but you can see some really useful sort of outputs around a sustainability policy or statement, the governance behind implementation of the standard itself in terms of right down from the board through the operational processes, having a transition plan, having an implementation plan. We talk about scenario analysis. There's guidance there about how to do scenario analysis, even right at not sophisticated level, but just to help organizations go through those first steps of thinking about what if analysis, and then some public reporting around progress as well. So this is the key. This is some of the key documents that the standard helps to enable. In terms of some of the key users and interested parties, the next slide, this shows you the key internal departments and roles that would be really useful to engage with. And I mentioned around that alignment of interest. Implementation of sustainability principles at the organizational level requires interfacing with a lot of different roles. And actually in my sort of advisory, wearing my advisory hat, I call it joining up the dots between all these different organizations. The standard is really useful to show all the different roles and responsibilities, which might not have sustainability as a key priority, but you still need to integrate there. So you look at some of the roles around risk, around legal compliance, around portfolio monitoring, around comms, in addition to those to whom they've got fiduciary responsibilities. So this is key interface. The standard sets out how to do that, and then why to do it as well, why to do it, and then how to actually do that and implement at the operational level. The next slide is, I did talk about, we are out for consultation and voting. It's called an internal ballot, internal to the ISO global community. The standard, we're still taking votes and comments up until Wednesday, the 11th of August. So there's still a couple of weeks just under to get involved. These are all the countries, by the way, that are participating in the working group. And again, extend my thanks to those again on the call. There's some guys on the call as part of the working group. There's still time to get involved as well. So even if you're not already part of the working group, please go through your national membership body if you want to get involved and comment on the draft committee draft stage. You'll also get to see the standard itself in draft if you do that. Just before I close out, next slide, just to flag also that there are a couple of routes you can also get engaged if you don't want to get engaged in the formal process itself. In terms of the reviewing of the standard, we've got a couple of websites. We've got the formal ISO website itself, and then we've got our own dedicated TC322 website, which we hope will become more dynamic in terms of content. And also we've got our own YouTube channel and our own LinkedIn section as well. So please get involved, and we'd be very keen to hear your feedback. With that, Peter, I will hand back to you. Thank you.